A billionaire finds out his black maid has been sleeping in a playground every night, and the moment he sees her shivering on that cold metal bench, he breaks down in tears. He thought she lived a simple life, but nothing prepared him for this. She's been hiding her pain, her struggles, and a little boy who whispers a truth that shakes him to the core. He thought bringing her into his mansion would save her. But that's when he discovers the real reason she's been pushing everyone away. A dangerous secret, a ticking clock, a fight she never planned to survive. Now he has to choose, walk away from the hardest battle of his life, or risk everything to save the woman who never asked for help. What will happen when the truth he never knew becomes the one thing he can't live without? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The night air held an unusual chill for Miami as Jackson Cross stepped out of his gleaming hotel's service entrance. His shoulders felt heavy with the weight of endless meetings and corporate responsibilities. The pristine marble floors and crystal chandeliers of his flagship property suddenly felt suffocating, despite their beauty. He loosened his expensive silk tie and decided to do something he hadn't done in years: take a walk through the surrounding neighborhood. The streets were quiet at this late hour, with only the occasional car passing by. Jackson's Italian leather shoes clicked against the sidewalk as he walked, his mind gradually clearing of profit margins and renovation plans. The familiar pressure in his chest began to ease with each step away from the hotel. A flickering streetlight caught his attention, drawing his gaze to a small playground tucked between two apartment buildings. The rusted swings creaked softly in the breeze, their chains casting strange shadows on the cracked pavement below. Something seemed out of place in the dim light. A dark shape huddled on one of the benches. Jackson approached cautiously, his heart skipping a beat as he recognized the hotel uniform. There, curled into a tight ball against the cold, was Liana Hayes, one of his most reliable housekeepers. Her thin navy blazer provided little protection against the night air, and even in sleep, her face showed signs of exhaustion. "Ms. Hayes," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. When she didn't respond, he gently touched her shoulder. "Liana?" She jolted awake, her eyes wide with fear as she recognized him. "Mr. Cross, I'm so sorry, She scrambled to sit up, nearly falling off the bench in her panic. "Please, I can explain. Please don't fire me." The desperation in her voice cut through him like a knife. Jackson had always noticed how quietly efficient Liana was at work, how she seemed to fade into the background despite her impeccable service record. Now, seeing her trembling before him, whether from cold or fear, he wasn't sure, he felt shame wash over him. "Why are you out here at 2 o'clock in the morning?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "It's not safe and it's freezing." Liana wrapped her arms around herself, looking anywhere but at him. I can't afford rent right now," she whispered. "But it's okay. I'm managing." "How long?" The words caught in his throat. She hesitated, then admitted. 3 months. Jackson felt as if someone had punched him in the gut. 3 months? You've been sleeping out here for 3 months. Why didn't you say something? Tears welled up in Liana's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I have to send everything I can to my brother and sister in Trinidad. They're orphaned. Our parents died 2 years ago. Andre is 19, trying to finish school, and Marisol is only 16. They have no one else." The weight of her words hung in the cold air between them. Jackson thought about the thousands of dollars he'd spent just that morning on new designer sheets for the hotel's suites. He thought about the marble bathroom in his penthouse apartment, bigger than some people's entire homes. And here was this woman, this mother who worked so hard in his hotel, sleeping on a park bench so her siblings could eat. To his surprise, Jackson felt tears rolling down his own cheeks. He turned away quickly, but not before Liana saw them. "Mr. Cross?" she said softly, concern replacing fear in her voice. "Please don't worry about me. I'm okay, really." Her kindness, even in her own desperate situation, broke something inside him. Jackson wiped his eyes and turned back to face her. "No," he said firmly. "You're not okay, and I'm not leaving you here. But no buts." He shrugged off his expensive wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, ignoring her protests. "Come on, my car's back at the hotel." Liana stood shakily, swimming in his oversized coat. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere warm," Jackson said, placing a gentle hand on her back to steady her. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow, but tonight you're getting a proper bed and a hot meal." They walked slowly back toward the hotel, Liana's exhaustion evident in every step. Jackson felt the weight of his own privilege with each passing moment, wondering how many others like Liana he'd failed to see, too caught up in his own world of wealth and success. As they approached his parked car, a sleek black Mercedes, Liana hesitated. "Mr. Cross, I don't want to be a burden. I've managed this long." "You're not a burden," Jackson said firmly, opening the passenger door for her. "You're a human being who deserves better than this. Please, let me help." The warmth of the car's interior enveloped them as they settled in, and Jackson noticed Liana fighting to keep her eyes open. She still clutched his coat tightly around her, as if afraid it might disappear. As he started the engine, he caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, exhausted, vulnerable, yet somehow still maintaining that quiet dignity he'd always noticed at work. "Thank you," she whispered, so softly he almost missed it. Jackson gripped the steering wheel tighter, his throat tight with emotion. In all his years of building his hotel empire, he'd never felt so simultaneously ashamed and determined. This woman had been sleeping on a bench in the shadow of his luxury hotel, and he'd never known. But now that he did, he wouldn't rest until she was safe. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the playground and its flickering light behind. In the passenger seat, Liana finally allowed her eyes to close, the warmth and safety overwhelming her defenses. Jackson glanced at her sleeping form and made a silent promise, not just to her, but to himself. Things would be different from now on. They had to be. The mansion's grand foyer felt impossibly vast as Jackson guided an exhausted Liana through its marble halls. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light across the polished floors, their gentle glow a stark contrast to the harsh lamp-post that had illuminated her makeshift bed just an hour before. "Maria!" Jackson called quietly to the night attendant who appeared at his signal. "Please prepare the blue guest suite and bring up some warm food." He turned to Liana, who stood swaying slightly on her feet. "Would you like soup? Or maybe something heartier?" Liana blinked slowly, as if struggling to process that this wasn't a dream. "Anything is fine," she whispered. "You really don't have to—" "Soup and sandwiches," Jackson decided, noting how she could barely keep her eyes open. "And extra blankets, please." Maria nodded and hurried away, while Jackson helped Liana up the curved staircase. She still wore his wool coat, clutching it around herself like armor. When they reached the guest suite, Liana stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in the king-sized bed with its plush duvet, the sitting area with soft chairs, and the elegant ensuite bathroom. "This is too much," she protested weakly. "This is exactly enough," Jackson countered, his voice gentle but firm. "The bathroom has everything you need. Maria will bring your food shortly. Please, get some rest." Before Liana could argue further, Maria returned with a tray of steaming soup, sandwiches, and tea, along with an armful of extra blankets. Jackson watched as Liana sank into one of the comfortable chairs, looking completely overwhelmed by the simple comfort of warm food and a safe place to sleep. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes already drooping as she sipped the soup. Jackson left her in Maria's capable hands and retreated to his study, knowing sleep would not come for him tonight. Instead, he pulled up Liana's employee file on his laptop, determined to understand how he had missed such desperate circumstances in one of his own staff. The hours ticked by as dawn crept across the sky. Jackson scrolled through page after page of exemplary performance reviews, perfect attendance records, and modest pay increases. Liana Hayes had worked for his hotel for 3 years, always on the night shift, never calling in sick, never causing problems. She was exactly the kind of employee that often went unnoticed, reliable, hard-working, invisible. The sound of movement in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. Liana stood in the doorway of his study, looking more rested but still uncertain, wearing clothes Maria must have found for her. "Good morning," Jackson said softly, closing his laptop. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Liana twisted her hands together. "Mr. Cross, I appreciate everything you've done, but I should go—" "Please, join me for breakfast first," Jackson interrupted, standing up. "Mrs. Randall, my housekeeper, makes amazing pancakes, and I believe I smell them cooking." As if on cue, the aroma of fresh coffee and breakfast wafted through the halls. In the bright morning light, Jackson could see more clearly the toll months of homelessness had taken on Liana. Though she'd cleaned up and rested, exhaustion still lined her face, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. In the kitchen, Mrs. Randall had indeed prepared a feast of pancakes, eggs, and fresh fruit. The older woman's keen eyes took in Liana's appearance, and without a word, she set an extra-large portion in front of her. "I really can't stay," Liana tried again, even as she eyed the food hungrily. "I have responsibilities. You have a responsibility to take care of yourself too," Jackson said firmly. "Please, stay until we can figure out a proper solution. I won't have anyone who works for me sleeping on park benches." Mrs. Randall raised an eyebrow at this, but said nothing, simply pushing the syrup closer to Liana's plate. The sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the quiet kitchen. Mrs. Randall set down her coffee cup and headed for the front door, while Liana suddenly sat up straighter, her eyes wide with recognition at the sound of small feet running through the foyer. A little boy, no more than 6 years old, burst into the kitchen. His backpack bounced against his small frame as he ran straight for Liana, who was already out of her chair with her arms open wide. "Mama!" he cried, throwing himself into her embrace. "Mrs. Martinez said you weren't at her house this morning, and I was scared, but then she called Mrs. Randall and—" "Shh, baby, it's okay," Liana soothed, holding him tight. "I'm right here. Everything's okay." Jackson stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. The little boy had Liana's warm brown eyes and curly black hair, and he clung to her like she was his entire world, which Jackson was quickly realizing she probably was. Slowly, the child turned his head toward Jackson, his eyes wide with curiosity. He didn't seem afraid, just interested, as he studied the tall man in expensive clothes who stood in this huge kitchen. Their eyes met across the room, and Jackson felt something shift in his chest. Strange mix of surprise, confusion, and an unexpected surge of protectiveness. Mrs. Randall appeared in the doorway, watching the scene with knowing eyes. "I see Micah found his way to the kitchen," she said calmly, as if finding a small boy in the mansion's kitchen was an everyday occurrence. "Mrs. Martinez called when Liana wasn't at her usual pickup spot this morning. I hope you don't mind, Mr. Cross, but I told her to send him here." Jackson barely heard her words, still caught in Micah's steady gaze. The boy's small hand gripped his mother's shirt tightly, but his expression remained open and curious as he looked between the adults in the room. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating mother and child in a gentle glow, and Jackson felt the weight of how much he didn't know about Liana's life, and how much he needed to understand. After breakfast, they moved to the living room, where sunlight streamed through tall windows onto comfortable leather furniture. Micah immediately gravitated toward the large television mounted on the wall, while Liana perched nervously on the edge of a plush armchair. Jackson settled onto the sofa, his mind still trying to process the presence of this small boy who had so unexpectedly entered his home. "Mr. Cross," Liana began, her voice trembling slightly. "I can explain about Micah. It's complicated." But before she could continue, Micah wandered away from the television and approached Jackson with the uninhibited curiosity only children possess. He stood directly in front of Jackson, his brown eyes studying the older man's face with intense focus. The resemblance Jackson hadn't noticed before suddenly became startlingly clear. The shape of the boy's nose, the set of his jaw, even the way he tilted his head slightly while thinking. "Mommy says you're my daddy," Micah whispered, his voice soft but clear in the quiet room. The words hung in the air like suspended crystal, delicate and sharp. Jackson felt as though all the oxygen had been pulled from his lungs. He stared at Micah, then at Liana, who had covered her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry," Liana choked out, tears streaming between her fingers. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out. I was going to tell you properly, explain everything." Mrs. Randall, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "Micah, sweetheart, would you like to watch some cartoons? I just made fresh chocolate chip cookies too." The boy looked between his mother and Jackson, sensing the tension but not understanding it. "Can I, Mummy?" Liana nodded quickly, wiping her eyes. "Go ahead, baby. Mrs. Randall will take good care of you." As Mrs. Randall led Micah to the kitchen, they could hear his excited chatter about cookies and his favorite shows. The sound of the television soon drifted from the family room, where Mrs. Randall had settled him with his snack. In the living room, Jackson hadn't moved, his hands gripping, his knees so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Explain," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please." Liana took a deep, shaky breath. "Do you remember the Gateway Hotel in Phoenix? 6 years ago? You weren't famous then. You were just starting to build your empire. The hotel was one of your first properties." Jackson nodded slowly. The Gateway Hotel had been his second acquisition, a struggling property he'd transformed into a profitable business. "I was working there as a housekeeper," Liana continued. "One night, a drunk guest was harassing me in the hallway. You intervened. You were so kind, making sure I was okay, walking me to my car." Her voice softened with the memory. "We talked for hours in the parking lot. You told me about your dreams for the hotel chain, and I told you about my siblings in the Caribbean, how I was trying to help support them after our parents died." Jackson's expression changed as the memory surfaced. "The thunderstorm," he said quietly. "It started pouring, and we ran back inside." "Yes." Liana twisted her hands in her lap. "We ended up in one of the empty rooms. It was just one night, but it was special. You were so gentle, so caring. The next morning, you had an early flight to Los Angeles for a meeting with investors. You left me your card, told me to call you. But you never did," Jackson said, a note of accusation in his voice. Tears welled in Liana's eyes again. "I tried. When I found out I was pregnant 2 months later, I tried so many times. I called the hotel, left messages with your assistant. I wrote letters. But Margaret Stevens was the head of housekeeping then, and she—" Liana's voice broke. She intercepted everything. She said I was trying to trap you, that I'd ruin your future. She fired me and threatened to make sure I never worked in hospitality again if I kept trying to contact you." Jackson stood abruptly, pacing the room as anger and grief warred on his face. "Margaret Stevens." He spat the name. "She was fired 2 years ago for embezzlement. She kept my son from me for 6 years." "I'm so sorry," Liana whispered. "After she fired me, I was desperate. I had a baby coming, my siblings needed help, and no one would hire me with the references she gave. I moved to different cities, took whatever work I could find. When I saw a job posting for one of your new hotels here last year, I applied under my married name, Hayes, from a brief marriage that didn't work out. I thought maybe working here, I'd finally find the right moment to tell you about Micah." Jackson stopped pacing, turning to look at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. 6 years, he said, his voice raw. "I've missed 6 years of my son's life. His first words, his first steps, everything. He's so much like you," Liana said softly. "He's smart and kind, and he notices everything. He loves building things. He makes these amazing structures with his blocks. And when he smiles—" She trailed off as Jackson held up a hand. He swallowed hard. "I need some time to process this. Please understand." He moved toward the stairs, his shoulders heavy with the weight of revelation. "Stay here, both of you. Please, I need to think." Liana watched anxiously as Jackson climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. From the family room, she could hear Micah's laughter at whatever cartoon he was watching, oblivious to how his innocent words had just changed everything. She remained in the living room, her heart pounding, wondering what would happen next. Through the windows, she could see the morning sun climbing higher in the sky, marking the passage of time as she waited for Jackson to return, to react, to decide what this revelation meant for all of them. The sun was setting when Jackson finally descended the stairs, his footsteps heavy but purposeful. He found Liana sitting on the living room sofa, absently watching Micah play with a set of wooden blocks on the carpet. The boy had constructed an impressive tower, his small face scrunched in concentration as he carefully added another level. "It's remarkable," Jackson said softly, causing Liana to start. "He really does love building things." Liana nodded, watching as Jackson lowered himself into an armchair across from her. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loosened, and his eyes were red-rimmed from what must have been hours of private emotion. "Can we talk?" he asked gently. "I'd like to know everything, about Micah, about your life since Phoenix, everything." Liana took a deep breath, glancing at Micah to make sure he was absorbed in his play. "Where should I start?" "Anywhere," Jackson said. "Just help me understand." She twisted her hands in her lap, a nervous habit Jackson was beginning to recognize. "After Margaret fired me, I was already 3 months pregnant. No one would hire me with her references, so I moved to Tucson. I found work as a waitress, but the morning sickness was terrible. I lost that job, then another." Her voice grew thick with memory. "I was sleeping in my car by then, trying to save every penny for the baby and still send money to Andre and Marisol in Barbados." Jackson leaned forward, his face etched with concern. "Your siblings, how old were they then?" 14 and 12, Liana replied. "Our parents had died in a car accident the year before. They were living with our aunt, but she was struggling financially. Without my help—" She shook her head. "I couldn't let them end up in the system." "So you sacrificed everything," Jackson said quietly. Liana gave a small shrug. "I found a women's shelter when I was 7 months along. They helped me apply for benefits, got me temporary housing, Micah was born there. She smiled softly at the memory. 6 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect in every way. Jackson's eyes drifted to his son, watching as the boy methodically arranged blocks by size. What happened after he was born? I worked whatever jobs I could find, cleaning houses, night shifts at convenience stores, anything that would let me bring him along or work while he slept. We moved a lot, staying in cheap motels or shelters when rent money had to go to Andre and Marisol instead. Her voice caught. I'm so sorry I didn't try harder to tell you about him. I should have found a way. No. Jackson interrupted firmly. Don't apologize. You did try. Margaret Stevens is the one who should be sorry. His jaw tightened. I should have noticed when you disappeared. I should have asked questions. You were building your company. Liana said softly. And it was just one night. You had no reason to think. It wasn't just one night to me. Jackson admitted, running a hand through his hair. I thought about you often, wondered why you never called. I convinced myself I'd misread everything. He paused, gathering his thoughts. How did you end up here, working at the Grand Plaza? We were in Denver last year when I saw the job posting. The pay was better than anything else I could find, and there was something right about coming full circle, I suppose. I thought maybe it was time Micah knew his father. She looked down at her hands. I just couldn't find the right moment to tell you. Until our son did it for you. Jackson said, a hint of warmth creeping into his voice. Liana glanced at Micah, who was now yawning as he stacked his blocks. He's always been observant. He saw your picture in the hotel lobby and noticed the resemblance himself. Jackson watched as Micah's eyes grew heavy, his movements becoming slower. He looks exhausted. It's been quite a day for all of us. I should get him to bed, Liana said, starting to rise. Let me help, Jackson offered. Please? Together, they guided a sleepy Micah up to the guest suite, where Mrs. Randall had already turned down the beds and left fresh pajamas. Jackson hung back, watching as Liana helped their son change and brush his teeth, memorizing every detail of this routine he'd missed for 6 years. When Micah was tucked in, Jackson stepped forward hesitantly. May I? Liana nodded, moving aside so Jackson could sit on the edge of the bed. He reached out carefully, smoothing Micah's dark hair back from his forehead. Good night, son, he whispered, the word still new and precious on his tongue. Night, Daddy, Micah mumbled, already half asleep. The simple words sent a jolt through Jackson's heart. Once they were sure Micah was sleeping, they stepped into the hallway. I want you both to stay here, Jackson said firmly. Not just tonight, until you find your feet properly. There's plenty of room, and you'll be safe here. Liana opened her mouth to protest, but Jackson held up a hand. Please, Liana, let me do this much, at least. After a moment, she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. I'll let you get some rest. Jackson said, we can talk more tomorrow about arrangements for Micah, about making this work somehow. Liana smiled tiredly and turned toward the guest suite. I just need some fresh air first, clear my head a bit. Jackson watched her step out onto the balcony, about to head to his own room when he heard her pull out her phone. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but her next word stopped him cold. I know, Mari, she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling. But I can't tell him about the diagnosis yet. He's already dealing with so much. Jackson froze in the hallway, his heart suddenly pounding as Liana's voice carried softly through the open balcony door, unaware that her whispered confession had just changed everything once again. Jackson remained frozen in the hallway, his breath catching as Liana's voice drifted through the balcony doors. Thanks again for watching Micah today, Rosa, Liana said softly into her phone. I know it was last minute, Yes, he's safe now. We both are. She paused, and Jackson could hear the weariness in her voice. But I can't keep hiding this much longer. The dizzy spells are getting worse, and today I nearly collapsed while making beds. Jackson's hands clenched at his sides as he listened, his heart pounding harder with each word. I know I should start the treatments. Liana continued, her voice breaking. But I can't lose those work hours. Andre and Marisol's tuition is due next month, and they're so close to finishing their degrees. I've come too far to let them down now. She fell silent, listening to whatever Rosa was saying. The doctor said waiting is dangerous, but what choice do I have? They have no one else. Unable to stand still any longer, Jackson stepped onto the balcony. Liana turned sharply, nearly dropping her phone. Rosa, I have to go, she whispered quickly. I'll talk to you tomorrow. For a long moment after she hung up, they just looked at each other. The night air was cool, and Liana wrapped her arms around herself. Whether from cold or fear, Jackson couldn't tell. How much did you hear? She finally asked. Enough. Jackson's voice was gentle but firm. How long have you been sick? Liana's shoulders slumped. The symptoms started about 8 months ago. Fatigue, dizziness, chest pain. I ignored it as long as I could, but then I fainted at work last month. Rosa covered for me, helped me get to a free clinic. Her voice trailed off. And? Jackson prompted softly, though dread was already building in his chest. It's my heart, Liana whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. There's a problem with one of the valves. It's getting worse, and without surgery. She shook her head, unable to finish. Jackson took a step closer. But there are treatments. Surgery that could help? Yes, but the cost... Liana's voice broke. Even with insurance, the copays and time off work. I can't do that to Andre and Marisol. They're counting on me. And what about Micah? Jackson asked quietly. Isn't he counting on you too? Fresh tears spilled down Liana's cheeks. Of course he is. Don't you think that keeps me awake at night? But I promised our parents I would take care of them all. I can't break that promise. Jackson moved closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Liana, listen to me. You're not alone anymore. Let me help you. No. She pulled away, wiping roughly at her tears. I won't take your money, Jackson. You don't owe me anything. This isn't about owing anyone anything. Jackson insisted. This is about saving your life. For Micah, for your siblings, for yourself. Please. Liana's voice was barely audible. Please don't try to fix this. I've managed on my own this long. And look where that's gotten you, Jackson said, more sharply than he intended. He softened his tone when she flinched. I'm sorry, but Liana, sleeping on park benches while you're this sick, what if something had happened to you out there? I had no choice, she whispered. You do now, Jackson said firmly. I know you're proud, and I respect that. But this isn't just about you anymore. Our son needs his mother. Your siblings need their sister, and I... He paused, surprising himself with the depth of emotion in his voice. I need you to live. Liana looked up at him, startled by the intensity in his words. Jackson, just promise me you'll think about it, he said quietly. That's all I'm asking for tonight. After a long moment, she nodded. I'll think about it, she whispered. Thank you. Jackson squeezed her shoulder gently. Try to get some rest. He waited until she went back inside before heading to his office. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the number he needed. Within minutes, he had his assistant emailing him everything available on cardiac valve disorders and the top treatment centers in the country. The hours crept by as Jackson sat at his desk, surrounded by medical brochures and treatment protocols he'd had rushed to him. The words blurred together. Mortality rates, surgical risks, recovery times. But one thing became crystal clear. Without intervention, Liana's condition would only deteriorate. His gaze drifted to a photo of Micah he'd taken earlier that evening, the boy's smile so bright and trusting. The thought of that smile dimming, of Micah facing the loss of his mother when Jackson had only just found them both. It was unbearable. "I won't let it happen." He whispered into the darkness of his office, his voice thick with determination. "I don't care what it takes. I won't let her die." The medical brochures scattered across his desk seemed to mock him with their clinical terminology and stark statistics, but Jackson refused to look away. He would learn everything he needed to know. He would find the best doctors, the most advanced treatments. And somehow, he would convince Liana to accept help before it was too late. Outside his office window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky, but Jackson barely noticed. His entire world had narrowed to one singular purpose: saving the mother of his child, the woman who had sacrificed everything for others until she had nothing left to give but her own life. And that was the one sacrifice he would not allow her to make. The morning sun crept through the office windows, casting long shadows across Jackson's desk, where papers and medical brochures lay scattered. His eyes burned from staring at his laptop screen all night, the words blurring together after hours of research. He rubbed his tired face, trying to focus on yet another medical article when a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Daddy?" The word, still so new and precious, snapped Jackson to attention. Micah stood in the doorway, clutching a bright red toy truck in his small hands. His pajamas had little rockets printed all over them, and his dark curls were still messy from sleep. "Hey, buddy," Jackson said softly, his exhaustion melting away at the sight of his son. "You're up early." Micah padded into the office, his bare feet silent on the carpet. "Will you play trucks with me? Mommy's still sleeping." Jackson glanced at his computer screen, then back at Micah's hopeful face. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "Of course I will." He pushed back from his desk and moved to sit on the floor, patting the space beside him. "Show me how it works." Micah's face lit up as he scrambled to sit next to Jackson, their shoulders touching. "This is my favorite truck," he explained, holding up the toy. "His name is Red Lightning, and he's super fast." He demonstrated by zooming the truck across the carpet with enthusiastic engine noises. "Very impressive," Jackson said, smiling as Micah handed him another truck from his pocket. "What's this one's name?" "That's Blue Thunder," Micah said seriously. "He's Red Lightning's best friend." For the next hour, Jackson found himself completely immersed in Micah's world of racing trucks and rescue missions. His son's imagination was boundless, creating elaborate scenarios where their trucks had to save other toys from dangerous situations. Jackson marveled at how naturally they fell into sync, as if they'd been playing together for years instead of days. "And now they have to jump over the canyon," Micah declared, pointing to the space between two books that had fallen from Jackson's desk during their play. "That looks dangerous," Jackson said, making his truck rev up dramatically. "Are you sure Blue Thunder can make it?" Micah giggled. "He can do anything with Red Lightning's help." The sound of their combined truck noises and Micah's laughter filled the office, drowning out the worries that had consumed Jackson's night. When was the last time he'd sat on the floor and just played? He couldn't remember, but watching Micah's joy made him wish he'd done it sooner. A soft noise in the doorway drew their attention. Liana stood there, wearing a borrowed robe over her nightgown, her face soft with sleep, but her eyes concerned. "There you are," she said to Micah. "I was worried when I didn't find you in bed." "Mommy, look! Daddy and I are having truck adventures." Micah jumped up to show her his toy. Jackson noticed how Liana steadied herself against the doorframe, her face paler than it should be. He wanted to rush to her side, to support her, but he knew she would resist any obvious help. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Liana said, managing a warm smile for their son. "But it's time for breakfast. Why don't you go wash up while I talk to your daddy for a minute?" Micah looked between them, clutching his trucks. "Can we play again later?" he asked Jackson. "Anytime you want, buddy." Jackson promised, his heart swelling at the way Micah's whole face brightened. After Micah scampered off, Liana stepped into the office, her eyes taking in the medical papers scattered across Jackson's desk. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. "Neither did you, I'm guessing." He countered gently. She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture he was beginning to recognize. "Jackson, about last night. We don't have to talk about it right now." He interrupted softly. "Let's just have breakfast together. As a family." The word hung between them, loaded with meaning. Liana's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away, but she nodded. In the kitchen, Mrs. Randall had outdone herself. The table was set with fresh fruit, warm muffins, scrambled eggs, and crispy bacon. Micah bounced in his seat, his trucks lined up beside his plate, as he told Mrs. Randall all about his morning adventure. "Is that so?" Mrs. Randall said, winking at Jackson as she poured coffee. "Well, it sounds like your daddy is quite the truck driver. He does all the best voices," Micah declared proudly. Jackson caught Liana watching him with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, she quickly looked away, focusing on cutting Micah's food into smaller pieces. The atmosphere was tender, but weighted with unspoken words, especially when Liana's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. Mrs. Randall noticed too. As she refreshed Liana's drink, she rested a motherly hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "You know, dear," she said quietly, "sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help when it's offered with love." Liana's eyes welled up again, and she busied herself with wiping Micah's syrupy face to hide her emotion. While Micah chatted about his plans for more truck adventures, Jackson discreetly checked his phone under the table. His assistant had been working through the night, too, arranging consultations with top cardiac specialists and setting up a discreet financial assistance plan that would cover not only Liana's medical care, but also continued support for her siblings. Just as breakfast was wrapping up, Jackson's phone vibrated. He excused himself to take the call in the hallway, his heart racing when he recognized the number. "Mr. Cross?" A professional voice greeted him. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen's office at Boston Medical Center. We've received your urgent inquiry about Miss Hayes' case." Jackson gripped the phone tighter. "Yes, thank you for calling back so quickly. Dr. Chen has reviewed the preliminary information you sent over. Given the severity of the situation, she's willing to see Miss Hayes this Thursday morning. However," the voice became gentler, "we'll need the patient's consent and presence, of course." Jackson watched through the doorway as Liana helped Micah stack his empty plate on top of hers, her movements careful and measured to hide her weakness. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll make sure she's there." After ending the call, Jackson leaned against the wall, closing his eyes briefly. Now came the hardest part, convincing Liana to accept the help that could save her life. 3 days to help her understand that she didn't have to sacrifice herself to protect everyone else. 3 days to make her see that she deserved to live. As morning sunlight streamed through the mansion's tall windows, Jackson found himself settling into a new routine that felt surprisingly natural. Each day began with helping Micah get ready for school, a task that brought both joy and a sharp awareness of all the moments he'd missed. "Here, buddy, let me help you with those shoelaces," Jackson offered, kneeling beside Micah in the foyer. The 6-year-old's tongue poked out in concentration as he watched Jackson demonstrate the loops. "Like bunny ears?" Micah asked, his small fingers mimicking the motion. "Exactly like that." Jackson smiled, watching pride bloom across his son's face when the laces finally held. From the kitchen doorway, he caught Liana observing them, her expression a complex mixture of happiness and something that looked like grief. After school, Jackson made sure to clear his schedule for homework time. He'd moved a comfortable desk into the library, where Micah could work while surrounded by books. Today, they were tackling first-grade math. 7 + 3 = Jackson prompted gently, watching Micah count on his fingers. 10, Micah exclaimed, beaming when Jackson high-fived him. "You're getting so good at this." Jackson praised, noticing how Micah practically glowed under the attention. These moments felt precious, each one a small step toward bridging the years they'd lost. Liana would often pause in her daily activities to watch them, thinking they couldn't see her. But Jackson noticed how she'd lean against door frames for support more frequently, how her breathing sometimes became labored after climbing the stairs. Each sign of her failing health felt like a knife in his chest. Bedtime became Jackson's favorite part of their new routine. Micah would choose a story, usually insisting on just one more, until Liana gently enforced limits. Tonight he'd selected Where the Wild Things Are, snuggling between them on his bed as Jackson read with different voices for each character. "The wild things roared their terrible roars," Jackson growled playfully, making Micah giggle and burrow closer. "Daddy does the best monster voices," Micah declared sleepily, his head drooping against Jackson's arm. Liana's eyes met Jackson's over their son's head, and for a moment the weight of everything unsaid hung heavy between them. After Micah fell asleep, Jackson found Liana in the garden, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. She looked ethereal in the fading light, but also fragile, like a breath could blow her away. "We need to talk," he said softly, joining her on the stone bench. "About what?" Liana asked, though her tense shoulders suggested she already knew. Jackson took a deep breath. "I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen at Boston Medical Center. She's one of the best cardiac specialists in the country, and she's willing to see you this Thursday." Liana stood abruptly, swaying slightly before catching her balance. "You had no right," she whispered fiercely. "My medical decisions are my own." "Liana, please." Jackson reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "This isn't about control or independence. This is about giving you and Micah the future you deserve. I've managed just fine on my own," she insisted, but her voice trembled. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Jackson countered gently. "It's family taking care of family. Whether you accept me as part of your life or not, Micah is my son. He needs his mother healthy and strong." Mrs. Randall's voice interrupted them from the garden path. "If I may," she said, stepping forward with a determined expression. "I've watched you both dancing around this issue for days now. Liana, dear, your pride is admirable, but it won't keep Micah from losing his mother." Liana's eyes filled with tears. "My siblings will be taken care of," Jackson assured her. "I've already set up a trust fund that will continue supporting their education and living expenses, regardless of what you decide about the medical treatment." "I don't know how to accept this," Liana whispered, sinking back onto the bench. "I've been responsible for everyone for so long." Mrs. Randall sat beside her, taking her hands firmly. "And now it's time to let someone be responsible for you. There's no weakness in that, only wisdom." Hours passed as they talked, the garden growing dark around them. They discussed practical arrangements, fears, and hopes. Mrs. Randall brought them tea and remained a steady presence, offering her particular blend of tough love and compassion when needed. Finally, as the moon rose high above the garden, Liana nodded slowly. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll go to the appointment." Relief flooded Jackson's chest, but before he could speak, a small voice called from the French doors. "Mummy, Daddy." They turned to find Micah in his pajamas, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. "I had a bad dream," he said tremulously. "Come here, sweetheart." Liana opened her arms, and Micah ran to them, climbing onto the bench between his parents. "How about we watch a movie?" Jackson suggested, noting how exhausted Liana looked. "Something fun and silly?" In the cozy media room, they settled onto the plush sofa while Mrs. Randall brought blankets and made hot chocolate. Micah chose Toy Story, but was asleep before Buzz Lightyear's first appearance, sprawled across both their laps like a warm bridge between them. Jackson watched the soft light from the screen play across his son's peaceful face, then looked at Liana, who was absently stroking Micah's hair. Her guard was down, maybe because of fatigue or the comfort of the moment, and he could see both her fear and her hope plainly written in her expression. On the screen, animated toys embarked on their adventure, but the real story was here on this couch, a family piecing itself together, fighting for more time, learning to trust in love's ability to heal what was broken. As Micah snuffled in his sleep, Jackson silently promised them both that they would face whatever came next together. Mrs. Randall dimmed the lights and quietly withdrew, leaving them in their peaceful bubble. The movie played on softly, but neither Jackson nor Liana were really watching anymore. They sat in comfortable silence, their hands occasionally brushing as they adjusted Micah's blanket, each touch a small reminder that they weren't alone anymore. The morning dawned crisp and clear as Jackson's car pulled up to the mansion's front entrance. Liana stood waiting, wrapped in a new wool coat he'd insisted on buying her, her face pale but determined. Mrs. Randall held Micah's hand beside her, the little boy looking uncertain about his mother leaving. "Be good for Mrs. Randall, sweetheart." Liana knelt to hug him tight. "We'll be back before dinner." "Promise?" Micah's bottom lip trembled slightly. "I promise." Liana kissed his forehead. "Mrs. Randall has some special projects planned for you today?" Mrs. Randall smiled warmly, giving Micah's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Indeed we do. We're going to make paper airplanes and paint them all different colors. Then we'll see which ones fly the farthest in the garden." Micah's eyes lit up despite his worry. "Can we make a red one? That's Daddy's favorite color." "Of course we can," Mrs. Randall assured him. She turned to Jackson and Liana, her expression growing serious. "Take all the time you need. We'll be just fine here." The drive to Boston Medical Center was quiet, with Liana staring out the window at the passing scenery. Jackson could see her hands trembling slightly, where they were clasped in her lap. "Dr. Chen is the best in her field," he said softly, trying to ease her obvious tension. "Whatever we learn today, we'll handle it together." Liana nodded but didn't speak, her throat working as she swallowed hard. The hospital's cardiac wing was pristine and modern, with large windows letting in natural light. Dr. Sarah Chen's office reflected her reputation, professional but welcoming, with degrees from top medical schools displayed alongside children's artwork from grateful patients. Dr. Chen herself was a petite woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. She reviewed Liana's previous medical records with careful attention before beginning her examination. "Your previous doctor was right to be concerned," she said finally, setting down her stethoscope. "The heart irregularities we're seeing are serious, but I want to emphasize that with proper treatment, they're manageable." Liana's fingers twisted in her lap. "How serious?" "Your heart is struggling to maintain proper rhythm and blood flow. The combination of prolonged stress, poor nutrition, and lack of consistent rest has taken a significant toll. Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but frank. Without intervention, you're at high risk for heart failure within months. Jackson felt his own heart stutter at those words. He reached for Liana's hand, and this time she didn't pull away. What exactly does proper treatment entail? He asked, forcing his voice to stay steady. Dr. Chen outlined a comprehensive plan: medication to regulate heart rhythm, regular monitoring, proper nutrition, and most importantly, rest. You'll need to stop working, at least for the first few months, she explained to Liana. Your body needs time to heal. But my family, Liana began. Will be taken care of, Jackson interrupted firmly. I've already told you, that's not something you need to worry about anymore. Dr. Chen looked between them, understanding dawning in her eyes. The stress of financial worry can literally be fatal in cases like yours, Ms. Hayes. If Mr. Cross is offering support, I strongly urge you to accept it. Your children need you healthy more than they need you to work yourself to death. The drive home was even quieter than the journey there. Jackson could practically hear Liana's thoughts churning as she processed everything they'd learned. Finally, as they passed the city limits, she spoke. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to just stop, to let someone else carry the weight. Jackson pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her fully. Liana, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. You're not becoming a burden. You're accepting help so you can live to see Micah grow up. That's not weakness. It's the bravest thing I've ever seen. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I've been responsible for everyone else for so long. I don't know how to put myself first. Then let me help you learn, Jackson said softly. Let me show you what it feels like to be cared for, the way you've cared for others all these years. For several long moments, Liana just looked at him, searching his face. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she slowly nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll start the treatment next week. And you'll let me handle the costs? All of them? Another long pause. Then, yes. Jackson squeezed her hand gently before pulling back onto the road. As they drove the rest of the way home, he could see some of the tension leaving her shoulders, as if simply making the decision had lifted a weight she'd carried for far too long. They found Micah and Mrs. Randall in the garden, surrounded by dozens of paper airplanes in every color of the rainbow. The red one, true to Micah's word, had special decorations clearly meant for his father. Mommy, Daddy, look how far they fly! Micah ran to them, his earlier worry forgotten in his excitement. As they spent the next hour launching paper aircraft into the autumn air, Jackson watched Liana laugh at their son's enthusiasm. There was still fear in her eyes when she thought no one was looking, but there was also something new there, a fragile hope, just beginning to take root. That evening, as Mrs. Randall served dinner, she caught Jackson's eye and raised an eyebrow in silent question. He gave her a subtle nod, and her face softened with relief. They would begin Liana's treatment the following week, and while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, they would face it together as a family. The weekend arrived with golden autumn sunshine streaming through the mansion's windows. Jackson had spent the morning quietly organizing a simple family outing, hoping to lift Liana's spirits before her treatment began next week. He found her in the kitchen, helping Micah with breakfast. I thought we might head to the community center today, Jackson suggested, trying to keep his tone casual. They have a great basketball court, and I heard someone mention wanting to learn how to shoot hoops. Micah's eyes lit up immediately. Really, can we go now? Liana smiled at their son's enthusiasm, but hesitated. Are you sure that's not too much? You must have work to catch up on. Nothing that can't wait. Jackson assured her. Besides, I've missed out on 6 years of teaching this guy how to play basketball. We've got some catching up to do. The community center was alive with weekend activity when they arrived. Children's laughter echoed from the gymnasium, where several families were already playing casual games. Liana found a spot on the bleachers, while Jackson helped Micah pick out a properly sized ball from the equipment rack. "Okay, buddy," Jackson said, kneeling down to Micah's level. "First thing to remember is how to bounce the ball with control, like this." He demonstrated a basic dribble, the ball rhythmically meeting his palm. Micah's first attempts sent the ball scattering across the court, but his determination never wavered. Jackson patiently retrieved it each time, offering gentle encouragement and tips. From her perch on the bleachers, Liana watched their interactions with growing warmth in her heart. A few other children around Micah's age were playing nearby, and soon they waved him over to join their game. Jackson gave him an encouraging nod, and Micah ran to join them, his earlier shyness forgotten in the excitement of play. "He's a natural," Jackson said, climbing up to sit beside Liana. "Look at how quickly he's picking up the basics." They watched as Micah participated in a makeshift game, his new friend showing him how to pass the ball and take shots at the lowered children's hoop. His face glowed with joy every time the ball went through the net, even if it took several attempts. "Daddy," Micah called out suddenly during the game, completely unprompted. "Did you see that shot?" Jackson's breath caught in his throat. Tears welled in his eyes before he could stop them, and he quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. But Liana had seen his reaction, and her own eyes grew misty at the pure emotion on his face. "I saw it, buddy," Jackson called back, his voice slightly hoarse. "That was amazing." Liana reached over and squeezed his hand. "He's been wanting to say that for days," she admitted softly. "I could see it in his eyes whenever he looked at you. He was just waiting until it felt natural." Jackson squeezed her hand in return, unable to find words for the overwhelming love he felt in that moment. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son play with his newfound friends, both marveling at how quickly their lives had changed. As lunchtime approached, delicious aromas began wafting in from the food trucks that regularly parked outside the community center on weekends. Jackson insisted on treating everyone to lunch, and they found a sunny spot at a nearby picnic table. "What would you like, buddy?" Jackson asked as they approached the row of colorful trucks. Micah's eyes grew wide at all the options. "Can I have a hot dog and French fries?" "Of course." Jackson laughed. "What about you, Liana?" She started to protest that she wasn't very hungry, but Jackson gave her a knowing look. "Doctor's orders, remember? You need proper nutrition." Finally, she smiled and pointed to a truck serving grilled chicken sandwiches. They gathered their food and settled at the picnic table, the autumn breeze gentle against their skin. Micah chatted excitedly about his basketball game between bites, while Jackson and Liana shared knowing smiles over his enthusiasm. "What do you want to be when you grow up, Micah?" Jackson asked during a lull in the conversation. Micah considered this seriously while munching on a French fry. "Maybe a doctor, or a basketball player, or both." "Dr. Micah Hayes, MVP." Liana teased, ruffling his hair. "I like the sound of that." "Whatever you want to be, we'll help you get there," Jackson promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Sky's the limit, buddy." They spent the afternoon talking about Micah's future dreams, his current favorite subjects in school, and all the things he wanted to learn. With each passing hour, Liana found herself relaxing more, allowing herself to imagine a future where they could be a real family. As the sun began to set, they made their way back to the mansion, where Mrs. Randall had prepared a simple but delicious dinner. Micah was still buzzing with energy from the day's adventures, demonstrating his new basketball moves between bites of food. "Can we go back tomorrow?" he asked hopefully. "Maybe next weekend," Liana answered, sharing a smile with Jackson. "We need to rest tomorrow." After dinner, while Liana helped Micah get ready for bed, Jackson slipped into his study. He pulled out his phone and began making quiet calls, planning something special for Liana's upcoming birthday. As he looked at his calendar, he couldn't help but smile, thinking about how much joy had entered his life in such a short time. Through the open door, he could hear Micah's laughter floating down the hallway as Liana read him a bedtime story. The sound filled his heart with a contentment he'd never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead with Liana's treatment, moments like today reminded him of what they were fighting for: the chance to be a family, to make up for lost time, to create new memories together. He opened his laptop and began researching birthday ideas, determined to make Liana's special day as meaningful as possible. She deserved to feel cherished, to know that she wasn't alone anymore. As he worked, the sounds of his family's evening routine continued around him, a gentle reminder of how blessed he truly was. Jackson moved through the mansion with quiet determination, directing staff members who carried streamers and soft fairy lights. The dining room was slowly transforming into something magical, with gentle golden illumination casting warm shadows across the walls. "Mrs. Randall, is everything ready for the video call?" he asked, adjusting a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Liana," in elegant script. The housekeeper nodded, patting the laptop setup. "Yes, Mr. Cross. I've tested the connection 3 times. Andre and Marisol are standing by, ready for our signal." Jackson checked his watch. In the kitchen, the chef was putting final touches on a chocolate cake. Micah had revealed it was his mother's favorite during one of their afternoon conversations. The little boy had spent the morning creating a special card, his tiny fingers covered in glitter and paint as he worked diligently at the kitchen table. "Daddy, is it time yet?" Micah whispered loudly, peeking around the door frame. His excitement was contagious, making Jackson smile. "Almost, buddy. Remember, Mrs. Randall is going to bring Mommy down in 15 minutes. Are you ready with your card?" Micah nodded enthusiastically, clutching the handmade creation to his chest. Glitter sprinkled onto the floor, but nobody minded. The card was covered in hearts, stars, and a carefully drawn picture of their family. 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. As the staff made final adjustments to the decorations, Jackson felt his heart racing. He wanted everything to be perfect. During their conversations over the past weeks, he'd learned that Liana hadn't celebrated her birthday since her parents passed away. She'd been too focused on survival, on caring for others, to think about herself. "Places, everyone," Mrs. Randall announced softly. "I just texted with Mary upstairs. Liana's finished her shower and is getting dressed. I told her we needed her help with something in the dining room." The staff dimmed the lights, leaving only the warm glow of the fairy lights and a few strategically placed lamps. Jackson positioned himself near the laptop, ready to start the video call. Micah bounced on his toes beside him, barely containing his excitement. They heard footsteps in the hallway. "Mrs. Randall?" Liana's voice called out. "What did you need help with?" The double doors opened, and Liana stepped into the dining room. She froze, her hand flying to her mouth as she took in the scene before her. The elegant decorations, the cake on the table, the faces of her loved ones beaming at her. It was overwhelming. "Surprise!" Micah shouted, running to hug her legs. "Happy birthday, Mummy!" Tears welled in Liana's eyes as she lifted her son into her arms. "Oh, sweetheart, I can't believe this." "There's more," Jackson said softly, pressing a button on the laptop. The screen came to life, revealing the smiling faces of Andre and Marisol. "Happy birthday, big sister," they called out in unison. Liana's legs wobbled, and Jackson quickly guided her to a chair. She reached out to touch the screen, tears flowing freely now. "Andre? Marisol? How?" Jackson arranged everything. Marisol explained, her own eyes glistening. "We've been planning this for days." "You deserve to be celebrated," Andre added warmly. "We miss you so much." Micah climbed onto his mother's lap, proudly presenting his card. "Look what I made you. That's you and me and Daddy, and we're all happy." Liana hugged her son close, examining every detail of the card through her tears. "It's beautiful, baby. The most beautiful card I've ever seen." Jackson cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. He hadn't planned a speech, but looking at Liana's face, illuminated by fairy lights and joy, the words came naturally. "Liana," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the strongest person I've ever known. You've faced impossible challenges with grace and dignity, always putting others before yourself. You've raised an incredible son, supported your siblings, and never once complained about the burdens you carried alone." He moved closer, taking her free hand in his. "But you're not alone anymore. From this day forward, your struggles are our struggles. Your joy is our joy. You've given so much love to others. Now it's time for you to receive that love in return." Liana squeezed his hand, unable to speak through her tears. On the screen, Andre and Marisol were also crying, nodding in agreement with Jackson's words. The evening unfolded like a dream. They shared cake and stories, with Andre and Marisol telling embarrassing tales from Liana's childhood that had everyone laughing. Micah insisted on showing his aunt and uncle his new basketball moves, performing them right there in the dining room while the adults cheered. The staff had prepared all of Liana's favorite foods, dishes she hadn't enjoyed since leaving her homeland. Each bite seemed to unlock another happy memory, another story to share. For hours, they celebrated not just her birthday, but the love that had brought them all together. As the evening wound down and the video call ended with promises to talk again soon, the staff began quietly cleaning up. Micah had fallen asleep on a small sofa in the corner, clutching a piece of birthday cake he hadn't quite finished. Liana slipped out onto the balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. Jackson followed, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Thank you," she whispered as he handed her a cup. "I can't remember the last time I felt this happy." The night air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden below. They stood in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, both lost in thought. "You've given me back my family," Liana said softly. "Not just Andre and Marisol, but everything. A home. Hope. I don't know how to thank you." Jackson turned to face her, his expression gentle in the moonlight. "You don't need to thank me. Having you and Micah in my life is the greatest gift I could have asked for." The morning sun filtered through the mansion's windows as Liana prepared for her first treatment. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned her cardigan, but she forced a brave smile when Micah appeared in her doorway. "Mommy has to go to the doctor today, sweetheart," she explained, kneeling to hug him. "But Mrs. Randall has lots of fun activities planned for you." "Will you feel better after?" Micah asked, his small face creased with worry. "That's the plan," Jackson answered from the doorway. He was dressed casually today, having cleared his entire schedule to accompany her. "Your mom is going to get stronger every day." Mrs. Randall appeared behind them, already wearing an apron dusted with flour. "We're going to make cookies while your mama's gone," she told Micah with a conspiratorial wink, "and maybe paint some pictures to surprise her when she gets back." The drive to the clinic was quiet, with Liana staring out the window while Jackson occasionally squeezed her hand reassuringly. The treatment center was modern and welcoming, with soft music playing in the waiting room and kind-faced nurses who guided them through the initial procedures. "You're doing great," Jackson whispered as they set up her IV. Liana nodded, trying to focus on breathing steadily through her anxiety. The first few days followed a similar pattern. Jackson would work remotely from his laptop, while Liana received treatment, making sure she ate properly and rested between sessions. They'd return home to find Micah excited to show them his latest artwork or tell them about the games Mrs. Randall had taught him. On Wednesday morning, everything changed. Liana had just finished her treatment and was walking down the clinic hallway toward Jackson, who was returning from a quick coffee run. She looked pale, but she'd insisted she felt fine. Suddenly, her steps faltered. "Liana," Jackson called out, noticing her sway slightly. She tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The world tilted sideways, and she crumpled to the floor before Jackson could reach her. "Help!" he shouted, dropping the coffee cups and rushing to her side. "We need help here!" Medical staff swarmed around them immediately. Jackson watched helplessly as they lifted Liana onto a gurney, her face ashen and still. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as he waited outside the examination room, his heart pounding with fear. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was grave. "Mr. Cross, we need to talk about Ms. Hayes's condition." They moved to a private consultation room where the doctor explained that new tests revealed the illness had progressed further than their initial assessment. The combination of prolonged homelessness, malnutrition, and untreated symptoms has significantly weakened her system. He explained. "Her body is struggling to handle the standard treatment protocol." Jackson ran his hands through his hair, fighting back tears. "What can we do?" "We'll need to adjust her treatment plan, possibly extend the duration. But most importantly, she needs complete rest and proper nutrition. Any additional stress could be dangerous." When they finally allowed Jackson to see her, Liana was sitting up in bed, looking small and fragile against the white sheets. The moment she saw him, her face crumpled. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I can't put Micah through this." "You're not putting him through anything," Jackson insisted, sitting beside her. "We're going to fight this together." But Liana shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. I watched my mother die when I was young. The way it changed Andre and Marisol. I can't do that to my son. I won't let him watch me fade away." "That's not going to happen," Jackson argued, but he could see the fear had taken hold in her mind. They returned to the mansion that evening, with Liana insisting she felt well enough to leave the clinic. She hugged Micah extra tight at bedtime, reading him 3 stories instead of the usual one. Later that night, while the house was quiet and dark, Liana slipped from her bed. With trembling hands, she packed a small bag and wrote a note, tears falling onto the paper as she explained why she had to leave. "Please don't look for me," she wrote. "Take care of our son. Let him remember me strong and whole, not sick and dying. I love you both too much to put you through this pain." She placed the note on Jackson's desk, knowing he would find it in the morning. Then she crept into Micah's room one last time, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Goodbye, my sweet boy," she whispered. The mansion's security system had been programmed to let her come and go freely, so no alarms sounded as she slipped out the front door into the cool night air. She paused on the driveway, looking back at the warm lights that had briefly made her believe in happiness again. Then she turned away, disappearing into the darkness before her courage could fail her. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to filter through the mansion's windows when Jackson heard tiny footsteps in the hallway. Micah appeared in his office doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is Mommy making breakfast?" he asked, his voice still drowsy. "I'm hungry." Jackson glanced up from his laptop, where he'd been working since 4 in the morning, unable to sleep. Let's go find her, buddy. But Liana wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't in her room either. A cold feeling settled in Jackson's stomach as he noticed her bed hadn't been slept in. That's when he spotted the folded paper on his desk that hadn't been there earlier. "Why don't you help Mrs. Randall start breakfast?" he suggested to Micah, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll be right there." Once Micah was safely in the kitchen, Jackson unfolded the note with trembling hands. As he read Liana's words, his heart seemed to stop beating. The paper shook in his grip. "No, no, no," he whispered, immediately pulling out his phone to call security. Within minutes, the household was in quiet panic. Security teams reviewed camera footage while staff members checked every room. Mrs. Randall kept Micah occupied with pancake making, though the boy's worried glances toward the doorway showed he sensed something was wrong. Jackson finally had to face his son. Kneeling down to Micah's level in the kitchen, he took the boy's small hands in his. "Micah, your mom needed some time alone this morning," he explained gently. "But I promise you, I'm going to find her and bring her home." "Is it because she's sick?" Micah asked in a small voice. Jackson's throat tightened. "Yes, buddy. She's scared about being sick, but we're not going to let her be alone. We're family now." While security expanded their search radius, Jackson knew he had to look himself. He remembered how Liana had survived on the streets before, her roots, her hiding places. After making sure Micah was settled with Mrs. Randall, he grabbed his coat and car keys. The morning air was crisp as Jackson began retracing the paths Liana once walked to work. He checked every bench, every bus stop, every sheltered doorway. Hours passed as he drove slowly through neighborhoods, walked through parks, and questioned shop owners who might have seen her. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from security teams, but none had found her. The sun climbed higher, then began its slow descent toward evening. Jackson's desperation grew with each passing hour. "Please," he whispered to himself as he drove, "please let me find her." He thought of how far they'd come, the tender moments with Micah, the birthday celebration, the way Liana had finally begun to trust in happiness again. He couldn't lose her now. Not like this. As sunset approached, Jackson found himself driving past the playground where he'd first discovered her that fateful night. Something made him slow down, then stop completely. The old lamppost was already flickering to life in the growing dusk, and there, hunched on that same cold bench, was a familiar figure. His heart pounded as he parked the car. Liana hadn't moved, didn't seem to notice his approach. She was wearing the same thin coat she'd had that first night, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. Jackson walked toward her silently, his footsteps cushioned by the grass. The playground equipment cast long shadows in the fading light, and the flickering lamppost created an eerie dance of light and shadow across Liana's face. She looked so small, so vulnerable, yet he could see the rigid set of her shoulders, the determination to sacrifice herself for those she loved. He was close enough now to hear her quiet breathing, to see the slight tremor in her hands. Still, she hadn't looked up, lost in her own thoughts of protection and goodbye. Jackson's heart ached as he took the final steps toward her, the lamppost continuing its unsteady rhythm above them. Jackson paused before the bench, his heart breaking at the sight of Liana's trembling form. Slowly, carefully, he knelt beside her in the gathering darkness. The old lamppost cast uneven shadows across her tear-stained face as she stared straight ahead, refusing to meet his eyes. "Liana," he said softly. She flinched at his voice but didn't run. Instead, fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Please just go, Jackson. I'm only making everything worse." "I'm not going anywhere without you." he replied firmly, though his voice remained gentle. And you're not making anything worse. Look at what I've done! She choked out, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. I've disrupted your whole life. I've upset Micah. I'm sick and getting sicker, and I can't even work anymore to help my siblings. I'm nothing but a burden to everyone. Jackson carefully reached out and placed his hand over hers. It was ice cold. You're wrong, he said. So wrong. When she tried to pull away, he gently caught her chin with his other hand, turning her face toward his. Her eyes were full of pain and fear as they finally met his. Real love, he said slowly, making sure each word reached her, means standing together through the hard times. It means facing the suffering side by side, not running from it. And that's what I want to do with you, Liana. Stand beside you, fight with you, not watch you try to carry everything alone. A sob escaped her throat. I don't know how to let people help me, she admitted in a broken whisper. I don't know how to be loved like this. What if... Her voice caught. What if I let myself believe in it, let myself depend on it, and then I just disappoint everyone? What if I can't get better? What if... Stop, Jackson said softly, moving to sit beside her on the bench. You're not disappointing anyone. You're fighting so hard, and you're so incredibly strong, but you don't have to fight alone anymore. Liana's composure crumbled completely. I'm so scared, she sobbed. I'm terrified of being loved only to lose it all, of Micah watching me get sicker, of leaving him alone, of failing everyone who needs me. Jackson wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. Listen to me, he said. You are not a burden. You're a blessing. You and Micah, you've brought more meaning to my life in these few weeks than I've found in years of success. You've taught me what really matters, and I'm not letting you face any of this alone. She collapsed against him then, her body shaking with sobs as years of carried weight seemed to pour out of her. Jackson held her close, one hand stroking her hair as she cried. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you now. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night settled in. Jackson felt Liana shiver against him and immediately shrugged out of his warm coat, wrapping it carefully around her shoulders. Come on, he said softly. Let's get you home. Micah's waiting, and Mrs. Randall probably has hot chocolate ready. Liana lifted her head from his shoulder, looking uncertain. Home, she whispered. Yes, home, Jackson assured her. Where you belong, with your family. He stood and held out his hand to her. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her smaller hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. She swayed slightly, exhausted from emotion and illness, and he steadied her with an arm around her waist. As they walked slowly toward his car, tiny white flakes began drifting down from the dark sky. Liana looked up in wonder as the first snowfall of the season swirled around them, and Jackson saw a ghost of a smile touch her lips. Perfect timing, he said, opening the passenger door for her. Let's get you somewhere warm. He helped her into the seat, making sure she was settled before closing the door. As he walked around to the driver's side, the snow began falling faster, dusting his shoulders and hair with white. Inside the car, he turned up the heat and glanced at Liana, who had pulled his coat tighter around herself. The snowflakes danced in the beams of the headlights as Jackson started the car, transforming the familiar street into something magical. As they pulled away from the curb, leaving the old playground and its flickering lamppost behind, Liana reached over and squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me. The mansion's warm lights glowed like beacons through the falling snow as Jackson's car pulled into the circular driveway. Before he could even put the car in park, the front door burst open. Micah flew down the steps in his pajamas, with Mrs. Randall hurrying after him holding his coat. "Mommy!" Micah's cry pierced the quiet night as Liana stepped from the car. She dropped to her knees just in time to catch him as he barreled into her arms. His small body shook with huge, gasping sobs as he clung to her neck. "Don't go away again," he begged between hiccups. "Please don't leave me, Mummy. Please, please." Liana held him tightly, her own tears falling into his dark curls. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm here now. I won't leave you again, I promise." Jackson and Mrs. Randall exchanged worried glances over their heads. The older woman stepped forward, draping a thick blanket around both Liana and Micah. "Let's get you both inside where it's warm," Mrs. Randall said gently. "I've got hot chocolate waiting, and some of that chicken soup you like, Liana." But Micah wouldn't let go of his mother, even as they walked inside. His little fingers stayed twisted in her shirt, as if afraid she'd disappear the moment he released her. Jackson helped guide them to the living room sofa, where Liana settled with Micah still in her lap. Mrs. Randall brought mugs of steaming cocoa, complete with tiny marshmallows floating on top. "Small sips now," she instructed, helping Micah hold his mug steady. The boy's sobs gradually quieted as he drank his cocoa, though he kept one hand firmly gripped in his mother's sleeve. His eyes were red and puffy from crying, but the warm drink seemed to calm him. "I was really scared," he admitted in a small voice. "I know, sweetheart." Liana stroked his hair. "I made a big mistake. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too, even mummies, but I learned something very important today." "What did you learn?" Micah asked, looking up at her. "I learned that it's okay to let people help us when we're scared or sick, and that running away from people who love us doesn't make things better. It just makes everyone sad." Jackson sat down beside them, careful not to crowd them, but wanting to be close. "That's right," he said. "And we're going to help your mum get better, Micah. All of us together." Later that night, after Micah had finally fallen asleep, curled against his mother's side, Jackson brought a pillow and blanket to the guest room's armchair. Liana watched him from where she lay in bed, Micah's warm weight pressed against her. "You don't have to stay," she whispered. "I want to," he replied simply, settling into the chair. "Get some rest. I'll be right here if you need anything." Throughout the night, Jackson dozed lightly, waking at every small sound. He watched over them both, Micah's peaceful sleeping face, Liana's occasional restless movements. When she woke once from a bad dream, gasping and disoriented, he was there immediately with a glass of water and quiet reassurance. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the curtains. Mrs. Randall appeared with a breakfast tray laden with toast, scrambled eggs, and fresh fruit. While they ate, Jackson made several phone calls, rearranging his schedule and setting up new medical consultations. By mid-morning, they were sitting in a bright consultation room at the hospital. The specialist reviewed Liana's charts with concern, then looked up at them both. "The previous treatment plan was too aggressive for your current condition," she explained. "You're still recovering from months of malnutrition and physical stress. We need to take a gentler approach. Build up your strength first." She outlined a modified treatment schedule. Shorter sessions, different medications, more focus on nutrition and rest between treatments. Jackson took detailed notes while Liana listened intently, asking questions about side effects and recovery time. "This isn't a sprint," the doctor reminded them. "It's a marathon. We'll take it one day at a time." As the weeks passed, small changes began appearing. Liana's appetite improved, helped by Mrs. Randall's nurturing meals and Jackson's insistence that she eat regularly. Color returned to her cheeks, and she gained back some of the weight she'd lost. Micah transformed too. With the security of knowing both his parents were there for him, his natural confidence bloomed. He chatted more at dinner, laughed more freely, and stopped checking constantly to make sure his mother hadn't disappeared. Jackson restructured his entire work schedule around their new family routine. He took early morning meetings so he could drive Liana to treatments and handled conference calls from home whenever possible. His office gradually accumulated children's drawings and family photos alongside the business reports. Mrs. Randall watched it all with quiet satisfaction, noting how naturally they fell into the rhythms of family life. She saw how Jackson's face softened when Micah called him Daddy, how Liana's smile grew stronger each day, how their evening routine of stories and snuggles became sacred time. As winter melted into early spring, Liana completed another round of treatment. This time, her body responded better to the gentler approach. Her latest test results showed improvement, bringing cautious optimism from her medical team. One mild March afternoon, they sat together on the mansion's back terrace, watching Micah chase bubbles across the lawn. Early crocuses pushed through the remaining patches of snow, their purple and yellow heads bright against the dark earth. Liana leaned back in her chair, face tilted toward the strengthening sun. "How are you feeling?" Jackson asked, studying her profile. She considered the question carefully. "Stronger," she finally said. "Like I'm starting to believe in tomorrow again." Mrs. Randall appeared with a tray of lemonade and fresh cookies, smiling as Micah ran over to claim his share. The boy's cheeks were flushed with exercise and happiness as he climbed into Jackson's lap, cookie in hand. The spring breeze carried the scent of thawing earth and new possibilities, while inside Liana's body, healing continued its steady work. She watched her son sharing his cookie with Jackson, their dark heads bent together as they examined a ladybug crawling across the terrace rail, and felt peace settle deep in her heart. The first warm days of summer brought new strength to Liana's steps. Where once she had struggled to climb the mansion stairs, she now walked confidently through the sprawling gardens, often joining Micah as he played after school. Her doctors noted steady improvement at each checkup, and her smile grew brighter with every passing week. One sunny afternoon, she sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping Micah with his science project. Construction paper, glue sticks, and markers spread around them as they built a model of the solar system. "Jupiter needs more spots," Micah declared, reaching for the brown marker. His tongue poked out in concentration as he added careful dots to the large paper planet. Liana watched him work, her heart full. Just months ago, she'd barely had energy to stay awake during his bedtime stories. Now she could actively participate in his life again, helping with homework and attending school events. Jackson found them there, pausing in the doorway to observe the peaceful scene. "That looks impressive," he said, settling down beside them. "Ready for the science fair tomorrow?" "Almost." Micah held up his partially completed solar system. "Mom's helping me make the rings for Saturn." The simple word "Mom" still brought tears to Liana's eyes sometimes, remembering how close she'd come to leaving him. She caught Jackson watching her, his expression soft with understanding. As Micah returned to his project, Jackson touched Liana's shoulder gently. "Speaking of school events, would you feel up to accompanying me to a charity meeting this afternoon? It's just a small planning committee at the community center." Liana nodded, surprising herself with how naturally the answer came. Even a few months ago, the idea of attending any public event would have terrified her. But her growing strength had brought new confidence. The meeting proved enlightening. Liana listened as local leaders discussed challenges facing immigrant families and single parents in their community. When asked, she shared some of her own experiences, her quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. That evening, after tucking Micah into bed, Jackson found Liana on the terrace. "You made quite an impression today." he said, joining her at the railing. "The committee members couldn't stop talking about your insights." Liana wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly shy. "I just spoke from experience." "Exactly." Jackson's voice grew thoughtful. "It made me realize something. We need more voices like yours, people who truly understand the struggles of working parents, especially immigrants, trying to support families here and abroad." Over the next few weeks, Liana accompanied Jackson to more charity meetings. Each time, her quiet strength and genuine empathy touched hearts and opened minds. She spoke of dignity in the face of hardship, of sacrificing everything for family, of holding on to hope when all seemed lost. Jackson watched her transformation with pride and growing determination. One evening, after another successful meeting, he shared his vision with her. "I want to organize a charity gala," he explained, pacing his office excitedly. "Not just another fancy fundraiser, but something meaningful, focusing on immigrant caregivers and single mothers. Your story, Liana, your journey." Liana's eyes widened. "Jackson, You don't have to decide right now," he assured her quickly. "But think about it. Your experience could help so many others who are struggling like you did." As summer progressed, plans for the gala took shape. Jackson threw himself into the details, ensuring every aspect reflected the dignity and resilience he'd witnessed in Liana. The venue, the speakers, the charitable focus, all centered around supporting hard-working parents facing impossible choices. The night of the gala arrived clear and warm. Liana stood before her mirror, barely recognizing herself in the elegant blue gown Jackson had chosen. Mrs. Randall helped style her hair, now thick and healthy again after months of proper nutrition and care. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Randall said softly, adjusting a curl. "And strong." Micah, handsome in his little suit, bounced excitedly around the room. "Can we go now? Daddy said there's going to be chocolate fountain." The ballroom sparkled with subtle elegance, soft lighting, classical music, tables decorated with simple wildflowers rather than elaborate centerpieces. Liana recognized many faces from the charity meetings, along with business leaders and local officials. Jackson took the stage as the evening began, commanding attention in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. But it was his words that truly captured the audience. "Many of you know me as a businessman," he began, "someone who builds hotels and makes deals. But recently I learned what true strength looks like. True courage, true love." His eyes found Liana in the crowd. "I learned it from a woman who sacrificed everything for her family, who slept on park benches so her siblings could eat, who worked endless hours while hiding a serious illness just to give her son a better life." The room fell silent as Jackson continued, sharing Liana's story with tender respect. He spoke of finding her that cold night, of discovering she was Micah's mother, of watching her fight for health and hope. "Tonight isn't about charity in the traditional sense," he said. "It's about recognizing the dignity and determination of people like Liana, about supporting parents who work multiple jobs, who send money home to struggling families, who never give up no matter how hard things get." When he invited Liana to speak, she rose on trembling legs. Jackson offered his hand, helping her to the stage, then stepped back supportively as she faced the crowd. Liana's voice started soft but grew stronger as she spoke from her heart. She talked about the pride of supporting her family, even when it meant personal sacrifice, about the fear of becoming ill with no safety net, about the humility of accepting help when pride demanded independence. "Second chances come in many forms," she said, tears glinting in her eyes. "Sometimes they look like a kind word, a helping hand, a moment of compassion when you feel most alone. Sometimes they look like a person who refuses to let you give up on yourself." By the time she finished, many guests were openly crying. Camera flashes sparkled through the room as reporters captured the moment. Jackson stepped forward, taking her hand gently in his. His touch grounded her, reminding her she was no longer alone. The warmth of his fingers intertwined with hers spoke of protection, of partnership, of a future neither of them had imagined on that cold night months ago. Cameras continued flashing as they stood together, two people transformed by love and compassion, ready to help others find their own second chances. The late summer breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers as Jackson, Liana, and Micah strolled through the neighborhood they'd come to know so well. Their footsteps followed a path that held both painful memories and profound meaning, the route to the playground where everything had changed that cold winter night. As they rounded the corner, Liana gasped softly. The once decrepit playground had been completely transformed. Fresh paint brightened the equipment, new safety surfacing cushioned the ground, and beautiful landscaping surrounded the area. The old flickering lamppost had been replaced with elegant lighting that would keep the space welcoming even after sunset. "Do you like it?" Jackson asked quietly, his arm sliding around her waist. "It's beautiful," Liana whispered, taking in the sight of families enjoying the renovated space. A small bronze plaque near the entrance caught her eye, and she moved closer to read it. "The Hayes Family Playground, where hope begins again." Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to Jackson. He smiled softly, squeezing her hand. "Every child deserves a safe place to play. Every parent deserves a moment of peace. Can I try the swings?" Micah bounced excitedly, already eyeing the brand-new swing set. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Liana nodded, watching as their son ran toward the playground, his laughter carrying on the breeze. Jackson guided her to a comfortable bench, not the same one where he'd found her that night, but positioned to keep Micah in clear view. As they sat together, Liana leaned into his embrace, remembering how different everything had been just months ago. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," she said softly, watching Micah pump his legs on the swing, going higher and higher. The illness, the homelessness, the constant fear, they felt like chains I could never break, like I was trapped in a nightmare that would never end. Jackson's arm tightened protectively around her shoulders. "You were never trapped, my love. You were just waiting for someone to remind you how strong you really are." Liana turned to look at him. This man who had changed everything not through his wealth, but through his compassion. "You know what I've learned?" she asked. "Love didn't save me. Not exactly. What it did was remind me I was worth saving, worth fighting for, worth living for." "Liana." Jackson's voice was thick with emotion as he gazed at her. "You have been the greatest blessing of my life. You and Micah both. You taught me what real strength looks like, what real love means." Before she could respond, they heard Micah's delighted shout, "Mommy! Daddy! Watch how high I can go!" They both looked up, smiling as their son soared through the air, face glowing with joy and confidence. After a few more minutes of swinging, Micah hopped off and ran toward them, his small feet kicking up wood chips along the way. "Ready to head home?" Jackson asked, standing and offering his hands to both Liana and Micah. "Home," Liana repeated softly, the word still feeling like a miracle on her tongue. She took Jackson's hand in one of hers and Micah's in the other. Together, the three of them walked away from the playground, their joined hands swinging gently between them, a family whole and restored, moving forward into their shared future one step at a time. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.